Let's begin. So we are here on Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis on 33B, excuse me, 33B, and we've been learning about this issue of having hadassim that have a little problem. They have too many berries. And let me mute everyone. The story of these hadassim, we had issues. Number one is that the berries will make it considered minumar. It will make it considered that it's spotted or that it has a inappropriate color on these berries, makes it not hadar, not beautiful. Additional issue that we saw from the Yerushalmi is that the issue is that it's more of a fruit than a branch, because it's like a more of a fruit tree. It's a cluster. It's a cluster for fruit instead of a braided branch, instead of a anaf eitz avos. If it has so many berries, it's more of an anaf eitz pri, not anaf eitz avos. So this is the issue, and we basically measure it based on how many leaves there are, because in a certain sense, if you think about it, according to the Yerushalmi's way, the logic behind that is that if we're calling it an anaf eitz avos, a braided branch, and we don't want it to be called a fruit branch, then we basically have to compare it to, was it more berries, or which would be fruit branch, or more leaves, which would be a braided branch. So in the Yerushalmi, you understand sort of the concept of roiv. If you have the majority, that's what's going to give it its title. What will this be called? According to the other way of understanding it, which could be a machlokes Bavli Yerushalmi, or maybe you could fit it into the Bavli as well. But according to the other way of learning, that it has to do with being spotted or speckled, and or having just it's not hadar, it's not beautiful. So then the question would be, why does it depend on roiv? Why does it depend on majority? It seems like even a little should ruin the beauty. But there seems to be a concept here that we go after the majority. If the majority is good, then it's okay. It seems like it's more of a rule in halacha rather than is this called beautiful or not, or because the fact is it is somewhat speckled. It is somewhat, it has different colors on it, but yet we're going to follow this concept of roiv, and that's really what the Gemara, the Mishnah really said this idea about. It goes by majority, it goes by roiv, and if the Mishnah on 32b had said that anov merubais may olav, if it has roiv, if the berries are majority over than the leaves. So there is a concept of roiv here, even though logically you might ask, seems like it should ruin it even if it doesn't have roiv, because there's these colored other things going on over here. There you have, and according to the conclusion of the Gemara, it doesn't matter if it's in one place or if it's in a few places. It's going to be kosher, even if it's the wrong color. Black or red, these are the bad colors. These are the colors that make it invalid. Nevertheless, it's going to be a problem. It has something to do with the fact that roiv, we go by roiv, majority, and something that's not majority, it's as if it's not there. Or you have the ability to remove it. We consider it as if it's removed. Anyway, it's a leniency. It seems that. I know it's a permit that is, you don't have the majority, it's fine, it's okay, it's kosher. Now, the Gemara was bringing this this other idea. Our mission is really talking about the berry issue, but the Gemara connects it to another issue called dichuy. Dichuy was this discussion, of course, which we've been dealing with for a week already, but the Gemara tries to bring proofs from the cases in the Mishnah. And the case in the Mishnah that the Gemara tried to bring proof from, so one of the cases was that it's ein mematin b'yom tov, or in miaton kosher. The Gemara said if you did minimize them, if you made less berries than leaves, it's kosher. That was the Mishnah on 32b, and the Gemara was figuring out. So when did you make these berries less? When did you remove some of the berries? And what's the Gemara's goal? Why does the Gemara care when you remove these berries? Because the Gemara is thinking that if you remove the berries after you already bound the lulav with the myrtle and the willow, the hadassim and the aravas, after you bound it already, so that would be a case where you made it kosher and it started out invalid, and you made it kosher afterwards, and that would be it would teach us a law regarding dichui. Might not teach us everything, but it teaches us at least the concept that if it was invalid at first, then you bound it together, and then afterwards you're going to remove the berries. So then you see that even though it was invalid, you could actually make it valid after the fact. Dichui meikara, it initially was pushed aside, and here you're going to make it valid after the fact. And so we see two things. One, the Gemara doesn't mention is, of course, the tasav leimin ha'asui. The Gemara is not dealing with that. There was a previous Gemara, and the Gemara is basically assuming that there's no issue of tasav leimin ha'asui. But the Gemara does say, but dichui, this would be give us a little clarity on dichui, that the fact that something was once pushed aside is no longer a problem. And the Gemara is basing this concept on the fact that you've bound it together. So that means that once you bound it together, it's called a lulav, and now it's invalid. And then you're making it valid after, even though we pushed it aside. And the Gemara's answer is no. It's not that we pushed it aside yet. It hasn't started yet. The holiday did not begin yet. You bound it before Yom Tov. After you bound it, you removed the berries, and you didn't remove them on Yom Tov. You removed them before Yom Tov. So all you did was you bound it together. You bound it together. That's called hasmana. That's you just prepared it. It's not really as if the holiday kicked in. It was never pushed aside. It never like, oh, this is not a valid lulav. No, we never said that to you because it wasn't the Yom Tov didn't even start yet. When Yom Tov begins, then you can say that maybe that would be a case of dichui. We're telling you it's invalid. But before Yom Tov, just because you bound it together, the eget is basically just a hazmana. It's just a preparation for the mitzvah, and a preparation for the mitzvah that's not considered anything. That's not considered as if it was pushed aside. We don't call it dichui. That's the conclusion of that little piece of Gemara. So again, the Gemara tried to prove it from the Mishnah in Miaton. And then the Gemara says, okay, we don't have any proof there. Let's try to prove it from the next case of the Mishnah. In the next case of the Mishnah, ve'ein mematin b'yom tov, next law of the Mishnah ended off that you're not memayit on Yom Tov. Now the Gemara says, maybe here we're going to be able to prove about dichui. Now, how do you prove dichui from such a law? The law just says you can't be mema'it on Yom Tov. You can't remove them on Yom Tov. Okay, so it's not allowed. So how do you come up with a case? How do you see any law about dichui from those three words in the Mishnah? So the Gemara comes up with a way how to bring in dichui. How do you get dichui into this? How do you get the concept of being pushed aside from a mitzvah and still being allowed? So the Gemara comes up with a way. It says, well, what would happen if you did remove them on Yom Tov? Well, it says it's going to be kosher. It's going to be kosher. That's dichui. Now we have a case of dichui. Again, the Mishnah just said you can't remove it on Yom Tov. You can't remove it on Yom Tov. Okay, I'm not allowed to remove them. I have a lulav. It has hadassim. The hadassim have too many berries. The berries are black or they're red. It's not invalid. I can't remove them on Yom Tov. Okay, no problem. Can't remove them on Yom Tov. Any dichui here? Do you see any? I don't hear. I don't know any case of dichui. The Gemara says, oh, but what happens if you did remove them on Yom Tov? If you did remove them on Yom Tov, then it's kosher. What do you see there? You see that you removed them on Yom Tov. Initially, it was an invalid lulav, and now it's a valid lulav. So you have a dichui case where it was pushed aside, and now we're going to allow it. And the real question is, when did it become invalid? You removed them on Yom Tov. So the obvious thing is that it's definitely a case of dichui. But the question is, was there ever a moment that it was actually permissible? It was actually usable on Yom Tov. So that would depend when it became black. Interestingly enough, really, it should depend when it became red. The Gemara uses the term black. But seemingly, the Gemara should have used the term red because first it turns red before it turns black. And when it's red, it would seemingly have been invalid. So the question should be really, when did it turn red? Just an interesting point here. Why Gemara says black?
Maybe it means blackens, or something goes towards black.
Okay. That's interesting.
Using it like a verb.
Right. So red is a beginning of it's blackening. Red is really like it fits within that concept. Okay, that's an interesting way of answering my question. But the Gemara says, so when did it blacken? So that would be a case if it blackened before Yom Tov. So then you have a case of dichui meikara. If it blackened on Yom Tov, then it would be a case of nira v'nidcha. So I just want to make sure everyone has these rules clear. There's the concept of dichui meikara, because we're going to move forward. I just want to conclude today with this Gemara. So there's two concepts that we've seen here. There's dichui meikara and there's nira v'nidcha. There's the concept of that it was never valid yet. It hasn't been valid. We pushed it aside even right when Yom Tov began. We said this is not a valid lulav. And there's a concept of nira v'nidcha where it was valid one moment, a few moments, a few minutes, a few hours, it was valid for some time. And then we said, you know what? Now it's not valid anymore. And the question is, when did it get black? Get black before Yom Tov began? May Esmol, that would be meaning before Yom Tov began. So that would mean that once Yom Tov kicked in, it never was valid. Since Yom Tov came, it was never valid. It's called dichui meikara. We said goodbye. It's not usable. Now you remove the black berries. Now we're gonna see, is it kosher? You remove the black berries. The Mishnah says that you can't remove them on Yom Tov. And what is the Gemara deduce from that? It says, but if you did, it is going to be kosher. So you see that dichui meikara, that it was pushed aside, was not valid. It got black from the day before Yom Tov, and therefore once Yom Tov kicked in, it was not valid. And now we're going to say, now you're going to be able to use it on Yom Tov after you remove the berries on Yom Tov, which you weren't supposed to do, but you did. You removed the berries, you're going to be able to use it. You see, dichui meikara, the fact that something was once pushed aside from a mitzvah, it doesn't ruin it. You can still do the mitzvah with it. So that would be a proof if that's the case of the Mishnah. But the Gemara says maybe the case is a different case. Maybe the case of the Mishnah, where you remove the berries on Yom Tov and it's going to be kosher, is a case where it didn't get black yesterday. It got black today on Yom Tov. It got black. And then you said, oh, it's black. I got to remove the berries. You removed them. So in such a case, Yom Tov kicked in yesterday, last night, and then the berries were green. And green berries are kosher. The lulav was kosher. The lulav and the esrog, hadassim, hadravas, everything was kosher. And then this morning, the sun came out. All of a sudden, the berries started drying up, and they got red and black. Now they're black. Now they're invalid. So it was nira. It was usable. Then it became nidcha. Then we said, no, it's black. You can't use it. And so what did you do? You went and for whatever reason, you removed the berries on Yom Tov. Now you have nira v'nidcha in the Mishnah, and the law is that if you remove them, it's going to be kosher. Oh, now you see nira v'nidcha is kosher. So what the Gemara says is, it seems that we have some clarity here about dichoy. We could prove it from the case of the Mishnah. The Gemara says, yeah, you're right. One of these cases we could prove from the Mishnah, and because we can only prove one way, we can't prove both. And of course, we're going to take the most, the case that's the most obvious. In other words, we can't jump to prove a innovation if we could answer it with something less of an innovation. In other words, we should pick the least innovative law rather than the most innovative law, because if you want to prove something, you need to, if you want to choose the most innovative law, you really need to prove that it has to be that way. But to pick the least innovative law, that would be, you proved it, because you see it has to be either the least innovative law, a less innovative law, or a more innovative law. You would have to, you would choose the less innovative law, because that's all you're able to really prove. If you want to prove the more innovative law, you're going to have to give a solid proof. Here, we don't have a solid proof. To prove that, we don't know how to explain the Mishnah. It could be this case, could be that case. It could be that the berries became black yesterday. It could be the berries became black today. So therefore, the Gemara says, let's pick the least innovative law. And this way, at least we understand the Mishnah. And this way, we actually will answer part of our question that we had about dichli. And what is the answer? What is the answer to our question that we had about dichli? The answer is that when you have a mitzvah, and it was once pushed aside, it was never usable for the mitzvah. The mitzvah came around, and the Yom Tov kicked in, and it's not usable, and you do go and fix it, it actually is usable. That is what we do. We are able to prove. The case where it's Yom Tov kicks in, and you're eligible, you're able to use it, and then it gets pushed aside on Yom Tov. Something happens, it becomes black, the berries become black on Yom Tov. Then we push it aside. Then we don't just say, we don't know if we can say that you can come back and use it. So that's the Gemara's conclusion there. Now, I mentioned yesterday, how does the Gemara know this? The Mishnah had said you can't remove these berries on Yom Tov. The Mishnah said, but if you did remove them, it's going to be kosher. So I mentioned yesterday, and it's connected to this, the next Gemara. Who says? Maybe if you remove it on Yom Tov, it's not going to be kosher. This whole discussion of the Gemara is based on the Gemara's statement that, you know what? You're not allowed to remove on Yom Tov, the Mishnah just said. But if you did remove them, it's going to be kosher. And on that statement, we see something about dichui, that it's going to work, that it's going to be okay by mitzvahs. When something's pushed aside, you could do it. You see that. How do you see that? Because the Gemara says, the Mishnah said you can't remove it on Yom Tov. The Gemara says, if you did, it's kosher. Where does the Gemara know that from? Where is the Gemara getting that from? Normally in the Gemara, you need to prove things. Bring a source, how that would be. How do you see that? Is it proved from the pasuk? You're not allowed to remove it on Yom Tov. If you did, it's kosher. Where does that come from? So this, we said yesterday that, you know how you know that? Because the whole reason you can't remove it on Yom Tov is why? Because you're fixing it for the mitzvah. It's called fixing it. Now, if you can't use it, then you didn't fix it. And then it would not be a problem to remove them on Yom Tov. In other words, if the law is that if you remove it on Yom Tov, it's invalid, you're not able to use it, then the Mishnah should say, Mimatin b'Yom Tov, you could remove it on Yom Tov, but you can't use it. You can't use it. Because maybe dichoy, whatever reason that you won't be able to use it, maybe because it was once pushed aside. But if the Mishnah says you can't remove it on Yom Tov, it means that you would be able to use it after the fact, if you did remove them on Yom Tov. Why? Because when is something called fixed? If it's usable. If you didn't make it usable, then it's not fixed. I'll give you an example. Gemara is going to give a case where you have other hadassim. You don't need this hadas. So did you really fix? Did you do something, an act that's really fixing? Not exactly. You don't even need it. You fixed it? Not really. You fixed it. It's usable for the mitzvah? Not 100%, because you really have another hadas that you're going to be using for the mitzvah. So this one, you took something, you took a berry to eat. Okay, you ate a berry. You pulled off a berry and you ate it. Did you really fix this hadas for the mitzvah? Not necessarily. I have other hadassim. I don't need this hadas for the mitzvah. So fixing only applies if it's actually going to be able to be used, or it's needed to be used. If it's not going to be used, then you did no fixing. Again, can you take a fruit from your from your refrigerator and it has a leaf on it? Can you take the fruit off a grape? Can you take a grape that's on a cluster? Of course, you can take a grape on a cluster. What's wrong with pulling off a grape from a cluster of grapes that's not attached to the ground, not attached to the vine, just a cluster of grapes? You're taking a fruit off. Is that called tikkun kli? No. But on Yom Tov of Sukkot, when you take a berry off a hadas, then it is fixing. Why is it fixing? I can take grapes all the time on Shabbos. I have no problem eating grapes on Shabbos. Yeah, because on Shabbos, when you eat a grape, you didn't fix anything. Here, you fix the hadas to make it usable for the mitzvah. That's called fixing. If you're not using it for the mitzvah, if it's not usable for a mitzvah, you can't use it for a mitzvah, then it's not called fixing. So here also the Gemara is understanding very clearly that ein mamatin b'yom tov, you can't remove it on Yom Tov. If you did remove these berries on Yom Tov, it's obviously going to be kosher, because that's the reason you couldn't do it on Yom Tov, because you were fixing it. That means it was usable. I was making it usable. And the Mishnah says you can't do that. You can't make it usable on Yom Tov. It's called fixing a kli. It means it would have been usable if I did it. It will be usable if I do it. I'm not allowed to do it, but if I do it, if I did whatever by mistake, then it will be usable. Okay. So that was the previous Gemara. And now we are starting the next piece of Gemara. We are on page 33b. Kanu Rabbanan. The rabbis taught in a brisa. We are a little past the midpoint of the page. Let me tell you, it must be about 25 lines from the top. Yeah, I would guess about 25 lines from the top of the page. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa. 33b. Ein mematin b'yom tov. Mishum Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon Amru. Mematin. So the rabbis taught in a brisa, you're not allowed to remove these berries on Yom Tov. In the name of Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, you could remove them on Yom Tov. So we now found a new view. The Mishnah said you can't. The brisa brings the first opinion also that you can't. The brisa brings another view that you're allowed to. You're allowed to remove these berries on Yom Tov. The Gemara asks, what do you mean? Aren't you fixing a vessel, the Yom Tov on Yom Tov? You're fixing something, fixing a kli on Yom Tov. Again, this is a law of Shabbos and Yom Tov that you're not allowed to fix a kli. You can't fix something on Yom Tov, which is something that unfortunately many people mistakenly do on Yom Tov. They often put something back together again, or fix something, but it's one of the malachos on Shabbos and on Yom Tov is not to fix something and make something usable. So fixing a kli would be such a concept, misakein mana. And here or I should say, taking off berries from a hadas would be similar to fixing a vessel. Now, the Gemara is asking on Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, that says you're allowed to just remove these berries. Sounds very surprising. So Amar Rav Ashi So Rav Ashi says it's not that surprising. You're asking me how are you allowed to do it? You're fixing something? They're going shalikta la'achila. Rav Ashi says it's not a problem. You pick these berries off in order to eat them. And you pick them in order to eat them. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon Savar la Kavua, the Amar Davar Shedem Skavin Mutter. So you pick them in order to eat them. You didn't pick them in order to make it a vessel. You didn't pick them in order to make this hadas usable for the mitzvah. You picked them for a different purpose. You're hungry. You want to eat these berries. Now you want to eat these berries. So the law would be that if you hold like Reb Shimon, that you do something without the kavana, without intent, meaning you're Shabbos. What did you do? You took berries off a hadas in order to eat them. You didn't intend to make this kosher for the shaking of the lulav. Instead, you had in mind for eating berries. It happens to be that it actually now is usable for the mitzvah, but that wasn't my intent. And on Shabbos, we do have a concept of meleches machshavas, that laws of Shabbos are applicable when it's done with kavana, when they're done with intent, when you know what you're doing, you have clarity on your action, that your action is an act of with intent. If it's not intended, in other words, if you're walking on the and your sleeve bangs into the light switch, and somehow your elbow turns on the light switch, that's not called shoygit. That's not called mazid. It's not called shoygit. You didn't do that on purpose. You didn't do that by mistake. That's called, it was not even meleches machshavas. There was no intent whatsoever. But what is a shoygit Shabbos? Shabbos, you did something by mistake, is you forgot it's Shabbos and you turned on the light. That's a mistake. What happens if you walked by near the wall and you banged into, by mistake, you banged into a light switch and it turned on? That's not even a mistake. That was no machshava, no thought at all in your act. Your act was an act totally not connected. Your brain had no connection with turning on that switch, turning on that light. If you forgot it was Shabbos, so you turned on the switch, you forgot it was Shabbos, that's called a shoy. You made a mistake. If you just walked by a switch and it turned on, that's not even it's not a maleches, it's not a machshava. There's not maleches machshava. It's here also. You are having in mind, what are you doing? You're fixing a hadas. I'm eating a berry. You went to the kitchen. You saw your lulav there with a nice berry sticking out. Grab it. Now you go and eat it, and then all of a sudden, someone comes in and says, "Oh, the lulav is kosher now." So what do you mean it's kosher now? Oh, someone took a berry, and now it's not 52 berries and 50 leaves. It's now 49 berries and 50 leaves. So now it's majority leaves and minority berries. It's kosher. You got a kosher. So I didn't have a mind to make it. I didn't have a mind to make it kosher. I didn't fix a vessel. I had in mind to eat a berry. So this is where Reb Shimon kicks in. We have an opinion of Reb Savar lo ka'avuha. This Rabbi Elazar, Reb Shimon, he holds like his father. His father is Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon is very famous in the laws of Shabbos, that he says when you do something without intent, and it's called davar she'eino maskavin, it's mutter. And the case, that's the example that's given of that davar she'eino maskavin is mutter, is you are pulling a bed, and the bed has legs, and you have no intent to make a ditch in the ground. But you are pulling this bed, or this some type of a couch or something. You're pulling it, and it's possible that it's going to make a ditch. Possible it's not. You don't know. Depends on the earth. Depends. A lot of things. It's not that heavy that it's definitely going to make a ditch. It's definitely going to make a hole in the ground. And therefore, the law is that you would be allowed to drag it. And you're not. And the reason is you're not mechaven. You don't have in mind to make this ditch. Now, the Gemara is not satisfied with this understanding. The Gemara says, there really is another point here with regard to the laws of Shabbos. And what's the other point regarding the laws of Shabbos? Regarding the laws of Shabbos, there's a concept of psik resha. Psik resha is really, I should clarify one other thing. I jumped and explained this davar she'eino maskaven concept. I don't mean to say that it's exactly like flipping a switch. I don't mean it in that extreme sense. I'm giving you an understanding of davar she'eino maskaven, where Reb Shimon is coming from. That in Shabbos there is a concept of melechas machsheves, so that leads to this concept of davar she'eino maskaven, that if you do something without intent, so that would be along those lines. It's not the same thing, and there's different opinions about davar she'eino maskaven. Reb Yehuda, Reb Shimon, it's not exactly the same. I'm just throwing that idea that where's Reb Shimon coming from, because obviously we don't always use this idea of davar she'eino maskaven that some, I didn't have in mind, so I'm okay. I'm free. I didn't have it in mind. I was, throwing boulders off a big cliff, and God forbid it made. What do you mean? I was she'eino maskaven. I didn't have it in mind. You can't always use that idea. But anyway, regarding the laws of Shabbos, it does have, there is a bigger, there is emphasis on this concept of melechas machsheves. Anyway, Reb Shimon has his view. Maybe I shouldn't have given that example, but Reb Shimon has a view that davar she'eino maskaven is mutter. That's something that you don't have in mind, that you don't have in mind to make this ditch in the ground. You have in mind to pull a bed to another location, and therefore it happens to make a ditch. You're not going to be obligated, according to Reb Shimon. So it's mutter. It's even permissible to do. Davar she'eino maskaven is mutter. The problem the Gemara has. Okay, so now back to the Gemara. So the Gemara says that's very nice that Reb Elazar holds like his father, and what's going to happen here is that you went to eat a berry, and it happened to be that it became kosher. The hadas became a kosher hadas now for Yeluba. Okay, that I understand. Why? Because he holds like his father. His father says davar she'eino maskaven is mutter, and if you didn't have in mind, you're allowed to remove berries. Again, you're not allowed to remove it in order to make it kosher. But are you allowed to take berries off? Yeah, according to Reb Shimon. According to Reb Shimon, you're allowed to. So Reb Elazar, Reb Shimon says mematin, you could remove berries on Yom Tov, in order to eat them, not to make it kosher. Then naturally it will be kosher afterwards. Wow, how could he hold such a thing? Because it's called davar she'eino maskaven. Now, there is a qualification to this law of davar she'eino maskaven. What's the qualification to this law of davar she'eino maskaven? The qualification to this law is that if it's a psik resha v'lo yomos, that if it's going to happen automatically, there's no way around it. It's for sure going to happen. So you don't have this concept of davar she'eino maskaven. You can't just say, "Oh, I didn't have that in mind," because that's naturally an outcome of your act. It's for sure going to happen. There's no way out. You're going to do this. Naturally, that's what's going to happen. Psik resha literally means to chop off a head, v'lo yomos, and it won't die. The example given would be, you want your child to play with a toy. They don't have Toys R Us in the olden days. So what would they do? What would they play with? A chicken. That's what they used to play with. The kids would play with the chickens. And what would you do? You chop off the head and give the baby the chicken to play with. So what's your intent? It's not to kill the chicken. Your intent is the child should play with the the legs and the chicken. So you chop off the head and give the baby the chicken. So the law is on Shabbos, psik reisha v'lo yamos. Psik reisha v'lo yamos. You're gonna chop off its head. It's not gonna die. It's automatically gonna die. So you can't say I don't have in mind to kill the animal, to kill the bird, to kill the chicken. You can't say that because it's automatically gonna die. Psik reisha v'lo yamos. It's gonna happen. So the law is that that Reb Shimon holds his rule of in Hilchas Shabbos that davar she'eino miskaven is mutter only in a case where it's not a psik reisha, it's not definitely going to happen. And that was the example that we gave with the bed. The bed is not definitely going to be making a hole in the ground. And when it does make a hole in the ground, you did nothing wrong because it wasn't automatically going to happen. And therefore, it's called a davar she'eino miskaven. But if it's automatically going to happen, you can't say that. You can't say, "Oh, I didn't have in mind to do this. I only had in mind to do that." It's automatic. Well, you do one. It's almost like saying, I just want to flip the switch. I don't have in mind to turn the light on. You can't really say that. If you flip a switch, that is going to make the light turn on. Oh, I would like to move this switch, and I don't have in mind to turn the light on. That's not called davar she'eino miskaven because it's a psik reisha. It's automatically going to make the light go on. Yes, Jeffrey.
Oh, I understand a little differently. He is miskaven to eat the berry. If you are, you say, oh, now it's fit to eat because it became like a fruit. It's not green anymore. So I'm going to eat it for breakfast.
Right.
That's my intention.
Yeah. No, of course you have intention to eat.
By accident.
Now it becomes kosher.
So I am miskaven to do something I'm allowed to do on Yom Tov.
Right. True. But the term the Gemara uses is davar she'eino miskaven is mutter. And what that means is you're not having in mind the thing that's prohibited. You're having in mind to do the thing that's permitted.
Right.
So it's still called davar she'eino miskaven. You're not having in mind.
But maybe that's what Eliezer ben Shimon is thinking about it that way. That so because you could be miskaven like chila, that's one thing that sets aside. It's another category.
Are you trying to answer the Gemara's question that it's a psik reisha, and you're saying it doesn't even have a problem of psik reisha, that it shouldn't even kick in a problem of psik reisha?
Yes.
So the Gemara doesn't seem to be comfortable with your interpretation. I'm not sure I understand it either, but I'm just saying, like, whatever you're saying, I don't think you could say, because, I mean, the Gemara doesn't explain it your way. The Gemara gives a different answer. It doesn't say, oh, he is miskaven for the fruit. Now, I'm not sure what you're saying would answer it, but even so, I mean, obviously there must be something wrong there. No, if the Gemara is not answering that.
Well, what does achariti mean?
Peshana achariti, another one.
I don't think it's what it means. Okay, well, okay, fine. So, well, okay, I don't have to take a lot of time, but I think that in the part before it says, okay, B'yom Tov, Amar Rav Ashi, Kigon Likton Lachila. So how you translate Kigon Lachila? For example, is it? For example, he takes it, he could pick it off to eat.
Yeah. Okay,
so why can't we be miskaven to take it off to eat? It only got dark. Remember, it was green yesterday. It wasn't appropriate to eat as a fruit, but it was appropriate to be a hadas. Okay. And maybe we're talking about like we use nowadays. The first day of Yom Tov was Shabbos. And then we're not even going to lift it on that day. And the next day is going to be when we're going to say Shechyon.
Okay, I'm not getting what you're. So, what are you getting at?
Well,
Explain.
there's another category. In other words, there could be another. We could insert here another category also. He wants to eat it, and it's really not Yom Tov yet for us shaking the lulav. It's only going to be postponed because it's Shabbos. So I was going to say, oh, but now it got to look like a fruit. Now it's ripe. So now I'm going to eat it. So I miscovered to eat it. I'm not going to use it today for shaking. I'm not going to say the bracha for it today.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't see it in the words. It doesn't flow so well with me. But if you tweak your pshat a little, I'd like to hear it. So maybe like after you're welcome to call me. Maybe we could we'll speak later today. But so I don't see it in the words, and I think the way I've translated the Gemara is the way the simple understanding of the Gemara, and but I definitely would like to hear your shot. Okay, so let me just continue. And again, I'm not pushing you off, Jeffrey. I just we're very limited.
It's fine.
But I have more time later. You're welcome to call me or email me. Okay, so the Gemara says here that it would seem that when you pick these berries off the hadas and you make a statement, I am doing it for eating purposes. The fact is that you are also automatically fixing the hadas to be a hadas. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon cannot go and tell you, you want to know if you're allowed to pick the berry on Yom Tov? Yes, you're allowed to. He can't say that you're allowed to. He can't tell you you're allowed to because you're not allowed to. Because, yeah, you want to have a berry, and a berry is no problem to eat. But and there's a concept of davar she'eino miskaven, so you don't even have in mind to fix it for the Hoshana. But Rebbe Elazar Rebbe Shimon can't tell you that it's allowed because it's really not allowed. Because this is a psik reisha. This is a case where you're gonna say I'm eating it for this purpose, but it's automatically going to be fixing a Hoshana for a hadas for lulav and esrog. So you're going to be doing an avera. This is not the case where Reb Shimon really says is law. This is a case of a psik reisha. This is a case where it's not allowed. And that is what the Gemara asks on this pshat. That how could you say that you're answering that Reb Elazar Reb Shimon allows this, which is really a tikkun kli, really it's prohibited on Shabbos. You're not allowed to do this, and you want to come up with an explanation. No, he's really eating this berry, and he's eating the berry, and it's davar she'eino miskaven. He doesn't have in mind to fix the hoshana, to fix the hadas. He doesn't have that in mind. You can't say all that, and he holds like Reb Shimon that it's permissible. It doesn't apply here. That law doesn't apply. Here, it would be prohibited to eat that hadas. Eat that berry. It's prohibited. Why? Because not only are you eating a berry, but you're also fixing a kli definitely. You are definitely fixing a hoshana. So therefore, the Gemara is questioning this answer, Rav Ashi's answer. But the Gemara says it's not such a strong question. The Gemara says here, you know what we're talking about? The islay hoshana achviti. That really you have other hoshanas. And because you have other hoshanas, therefore, you have other, they use the term hoshanas, but really we should use the term hadas. It seems that the Gemara had a concept, they would call it, we saw this before, that they would call the lulav esrog bunch called a hoshana. Also kari lahud, right? There was an earlier Gemara that said, what was the Gemara? It said, kosher lo hishana. It's kosher for hishana. It uses the same concept, the hishana word. But what it basically means, and in our terminology, we normally would call it a hadas. So, or dalad minim, you could say dalad minim. But the Gemara terminology is hoshana. So here, what happened is, what you have other hoshana, you have another bundle of lulav and esrog, other dalad minim that you don't need this you don't need this dalad minim. this one is permissive, is so are you really fixing it? Not necessarily. You're not necessarily fixing this because you have others. And therefore, you might not even use this for the mitzvah. And therefore, you can't say that it's actually fixing a kli. So you have to understand that this is called a quasi kli. This is not a real vessel. You know, when you go and fix a utensil on Shabbos and you make it usable, that would be called fixing a kli. What are you doing here? You're doing you're fixing some spiritual thing. You're making a hadas into a hadas mitzvah. You're making a hadas eligible for the mitzvah. So we're using a concept called tikkun kli. You're fixing a vessel. Now, if it's not, is it really fixing something on a physical level, on the physical plane, on this realm, in this world? Is that really called fixing? Not exactly. But because it's a mitzvah and you're fixing it, you're called fixing a kli. But if you're not using it for the mitzvah, then it no longer has that category of fixing a kli. You don't call it fixing a kli. So therefore, you wouldn't say this is a psik ratio that you're eating a fruit and you're also automatically fixing a vessel because you're not really fixing it because it's not being used for the mitzvah. So you don't call that fixing a kli. It's almost like someone has their lulav and esrog, and they also have a bunch of hadassim in the refrigerator. And the guy goes and he eats a berry from the hadassim that are in the refrigerator. You're going to say he's fixing a kli? No fixing a kli. I'm not fixing no kli. I'm eating my fruits. So that is the Gemara's conclusion here, that this is the law of, according to Rebbe Elazar Reb Shimon, that you would be allowed to remove the fruit on the hadas if you have other hadassim. If you have another group of the Shivas Aminim, you don't have a problem. Now, I should mention here, which is something that we mentioned yesterday and the day before, I think David brought it up, about, is this berry really edible? What do you see from the Gemara here? Is the berry edible? So, on the simple level of reading the Gemara, you would say, well, if someone's picking it to eat, it's obviously edible. I don't know if it's 100% proof. You thought you wanted to eat it, you tasted it, and you probably spit it out afterwards. But when you did pick it, you did have in mind to eat it. So you could say that it's not edible, and you thought it was edible. It looked good. You tried it, so you were likton la'achila. You did pick it to eat, but did you end up eating it? The Gemara doesn't tell us. We don't know if you ended up eating it. So it's not 100% clear that it's really fit to eat. There seems to be a debate or question, different opinions about it. Is it really edible or not? Because there's implication if you're chayiv and meiser. There's a place where it says that you're chayiv and meiser, so that makes it invei hahadas a chayiv and meiser. So that implies, at least Shalmi brings such a concept. So it implies like, okay, so I guess it's edible because you're not obligated to give meiser from berries that are inedible. Now the other thing is that it does say that there are two minim in the lulav that make fruit and two don't. What are the two minim that make fruit? The lulav and the esrog. The lulav has dates, and the esrog is a fruit. It's like similar to, it's a citrus fruit. What are the two that don't have fruits? The willow and the myrtle. So the Gemara in Menachos says that it doesn't have fruits. We got a Yushalmi that says that you have to give meiser from the berries. It sounds like it's a fruit. There it says it there. It says mipnei shehu roi lachila, but the Bavli seems to say pretty clearly that it's not a fruit. And the thing is that when it comes to the laws of brachas, it's another shaila. What bracha do you make on the fruit of the anavim? So it seems that the bracha in Shulchan Aruch is shahakol. It's not really doesn't have a fruit. It's not called the fruit of a tree. It's you would just say shahakol. Hadas is really an ilan srak. It's really a tree that doesn't give fruit, and it's not called a fruit. And therefore, you would just say a shahakol. What is brought down in the laws of brachas, and in our Chaim, So there definitely is seems to be sources that that's not really considered a fruit and it's not really edible. On the other hand, I mean, if you just read the Gemara very surface level, it sounds like the guy's picking it to eat. Now, yeah, you could explain it like I said, he's picking it to eat and then he tastes it, he doesn't like it, he spits it out. But he did pick it, at least when he picked it, he didn't pick it with having in mind to fix the Hoshana. He picked it in order to eat it. He didn't end up, maybe he didn't end up eating it or swallowed it without enjoying it, but didn't know what it was. He didn't know, yeah. Anyway, it seems like there might be a debate about this based on Yerushalmi, Bavli, if is it called a fruit? It's not called a fruit. Anyway, I don't advise anyone to go eating the hadassim berries, unless they're unless they need to use their they want to have their hadas possibly usable for to use for the mitzvah. If they have others, then according to Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, then maybe there's a permit to eat the berries. Okay, so that's the end of this little piece of Gemara. Now comes the next piece of Gemara. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught in a brisa. If the eged of the lulav, the bind of the lulav became loose, fell off, it's no longer it's no longer binding the lulav with the myrtle and the willow, the dasim and the ravas are not being, it became loose. So or untied. Say normally hutter means untied. It became untied. The tie became untied on Yom Tov, the Yom Tov. So if it was before Yom Tov, of course you tie it, fix it. But here it became untied on Yom Tov. The problem is that we know you're not allowed to make a knot on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So the Gemara says, the Gemara brings this brisa. Brisa says, Hutter agdoi b'Yom Tov. Oigdoi, you bind it ke aguda shel gerek, like a bundle of vegetables. What do you do with a bundle of vegetables? You wrap something around it, or some type of string around it, and then you stick it in. You sort of like stuff in the ends of the bind. You stuff it in so it doesn't come apart. So you don't make a knot. You don't even make a bow tie. You're basically just wrapping something around it and then stuffing it, finding a little space to stuff it in, and it won't be it'll stay together. Now, so you do the same thing with the lulav, just like you do that for a vegetable. You do that for the lulav. You put the lulav, wrap something around it, maybe a piece of the lulav that fell off or whatever, and wrap it around, and you're all set. So the Gemara says, "Va'amai, why is that? Lianve mianav. Let him make a bow tie, and the bow tie will be a lot stronger, and let him do that. It's not a problem of tying. Lianve mianav. Let him make this bow tie." So the Gemara says, "Hamani Rabbi Yehuda." Oh, the brisa follows Rabbi Yehuda. This brisa follows Rabbi Yehuda. The Yamar Aniva Kshira Ma'al Yasahi. That Rabbi Yehuda holds that on Shabbos you're not allowed to make a bow tie. And Rabbi Yehuda says you're not allowed to. And basically the same law would apply to Yom Tov. And therefore, he says, don't make a bow tie. Tie it like you would tie vegetables. Aguda shel yerek. That's how you have to tie it. So the Gemara says, it follows Rabbi Yehuda. The problem is that we remember Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. That Rabbi Yehuda holds you need a tie. It's a mitzvah liyagdoi. It's a mitzvah to tie them together. And he learned the Gzeira Shava from Lakicha. Do you remember this? That you have to tie it just like we have by the Korban Pesach in Mitzrayim in Egypt when they brought the Korban Pesach. didn't apply to all the years when they brought the Korban Pesach, but in Mitzrayim, in Egypt, when they brought the Korban Pesach, they had to dip the blood on the. What did they need in order to dip what did they dip in the blood? The hyssop. They had to take a bundle of hyssop and they had to tie the bundle together. And that bundle of hyssop branches, they tied together, dipped it in the blood, dipped it and put it on the doorpost, dipped it and put it on the lintel, and so that bundle was tied together. And the Gemara says, "Lekicha, the same thing you need to also do for lulav. Has to be tied." And Rabbi Yehuda said, "You see, you have a Gezerah Shavah. You need it to be tied. It has to be a real tie, a real knot." So, how does making a knot? How are you going to do this for Rabbi Yehuda? And you want to tell me that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of this brisa, and that's why he says you can't make a bow tie. According to Rabbi Yehuda, even binding it together is worthless. You're binding it like vegetables. That's worthless. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you really need a real knot in order to fulfill the mitzvah. Why are you wasting your time with bundling it up with a yerek? You're not gonna fulfill the mitzvah of eged. Needs a lekit. We learning Gezerah Shavah. So the Gemara answers, you're right. According to Rabbi Yehuda, this wouldn't work. But the author of the brisa is not Rabbi Yehuda. It's someone who is following Rabbi Yehuda. He's following Rabbi Yehuda's view regarding the law of Aniva on Shabbos. He has a very big chumrah about the laws of Shabbos. He says, I follow Rabbi Yehuda, that you're not allowed to make a bow tie on Shabbos. But I don't follow Rabbi Yehuda regarding the laws in Sukkah that you need to tie a lulav with a knot. So I hold that you're not allowed to make a bow tie on Shabbos Yom Tov. I also hold that you don't need to tie a knot around the lulav. And therefore, what do I do with my lulav? And what do I tell people if my lulav, if the lulav falls, the bind unties, what do? You got to wrap it around and then stuff it in. But you can't make a bow tie. You definitely can't make a knot. I hold like Rabbi Yehuda, even a bow tie is usher, but I don't need it to be a knot because I don't follow Rabbi Yehuda regarding the law of knot, regarding the Gezerah Shavah of lekicha. I don't follow it. I follow the rabbis. That it's nice to put it together. I'll put it together with a bind. I'll bind it together. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you actually need a knot, and the Rabbi Yehuda wouldn't have this option. So it's high Tana. This Tana sabra lakavase bechada. He holds like Rabbi Yehuda in one law regarding the laws of Shabbos making a knot, but Poligale bechada. But he argues with him in one law, and that's the law about a lulav needing to be an eged that he learns Gezerah Shavah from lekicha. I don't hold of that. This author of the brisa doesn't hold of that law that it needs an eged, and therefore you're able to fulfill the mitzvah by just binding it together like a vegetable. And now we've concluded this piece of Gemara about Hadassim, and we're up to Aravos, the next Mishnah, which talks about the willow. Okay. Sei gesund, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.